with. But I discovered a white swan in the assize courts in Durham, where the judges would have had to swing their legs over the back because the swan's neck came up, so they couldn't stand in front of it. So they would have had to, robes and all, swing their legs over and sit on this swan.
With the proliferation of water closets came an unprecedented abundance of sewage. The cities of Europe were the first to pay the unseemly consequences.
London, for example, was choked stiff with filth. It had 3 veins, shall we say, 3 rivers flowing through it, the Fleet, the Thames and the Walbrook stream, and they were all choked stiff with the excrement of the hundreds of privies that dropped into it. And it became so bad that the streets too were filled with excrement, and people were fined if they allowed their privy to overflow. It was horrible, reeking, stinking, reeking, stinking.
But in 1858, London's newly formed Metropolitan Board of Works undertook an historic project under the direction of Sir Joseph Bazalgette, the construction of London's first sewer system.
Beautiful brick vaulted sewers, like the undercroft of a cathedral. Under London, throughout, there's a great huge network of this beautiful Gothic vaulting, which Sir Joseph Bazalgette built, and thereby saved the population of London, and indeed the world, by setting such a good example in the 19th century.
A world away in Chicago, America's first integrated sewer system was built in 1856. But the young city was facing a contamination problem that sewers alone couldn't solve. Increasing quantities of raw sewage were dumped into the Chicago River, which emptied into Lake Michigan, the city's only source of drinking water.
As more and more people started coming into the city, they had to take those water intakes and move them further and further into the lake. And for a while, it worked. But then in 1885, there was a tremendous 4-day rainstorm that just flushed all these primitive sewers way out into the lake, so that the water intake cribs were inundated with this polluted material. 25% of the entire population of the city of Chicago perished from waterborne diseases during that time: cholera, typhoid, etc., dysentery. Something like 75,000 deaths.
The Chicago River was the only viable conduit to carry away the enormous daily flow of sewage from the growing city. Chicago now faced a nearly insurmountable problem.
Here were these thousands and thousands of people coming to live in the city. They could not live under those conditions where their water supply was polluted, so that a massive, imaginative, dynamic solution had to be found.
The answer was a mind-boggling feat of civil engineering. A 28-mile canal was dug connecting the Chicago to the Des Plaines River, a tributary of the Mississippi, thereby reversing the direction of the river.
This canal was dug through solid rock. It was built with the might and the muscle of 8,500 laborers, most of them newly arrived immigrants from Europe, working with steam shovels and pickaxes and whatever they could. It took a great deal of imagination and daring to attempt a feat like this, to actually reverse the flow of a river.
The project was a resounding success, but it wasn't to be the last civil engineering milestone for the city of Chicago. Within a few decades, there would be another. At the turn of the century, a second industrial revolution was well underway in America. The late 1800s had seen the development of electricity, the telegraph and telephone, and the steel, chemical, and petroleum industries. America, along with Germany, had become a world leader in industry, with larger factories powered by electricity and multinational companies exporting new technologies around the world. In 1913, Henry Ford created the first assembly line for making Model Ts, and mass production was born. By now, plumbing in America had caught up with the rest of the world, and the industry flourished. Bathrooms were designed into new homes as a standard feature, along with hot water heaters and fully plumbed kitchens. bathtubs and fixtures could hardly roll off assembly lines fast enough to satisfy the demand.
As bathrooms started getting built and bathtubs moved indoors, the tradition of the Saturday night bath kind of arose around that period, and we entered an era in which taking a bath once a week was considered the civilized thing to do. But taking a bath any more than that was considered a waste of time and probably rather excessive. Why would you do it more than once a week? You were already clean. Starting around 1920, an old industry magazine started publishing a campaign for a bath a day in American society, and they distributed a lot of pamphlets. Some of our records show over 100,000 pamphlets were distributed to schools and to plumbing customers throughout the United States, urging them to take a bath a day.
Plumbing pioneer John Michael Kohler created his first bathtub from an iron horse trough in 1883. Then in 1911, the Kohler Company made the first one-piece bathtub with an apron, which was soon to become the standard bathtub design. New toilets and wash basins were made of vitreous china with brass fixtures, and color-coordinated sinks, tubs, and toilets were introduced. In the 25 years between 1929 and 1954, manufacturing numbers skyrocketed with a 367% increase in plumbing product sales. The era of the professional plumber had arrived. Louis Pasteur's germ theory wasn't widely accepted until 1890, but now the nature of waterborne disease was well understood. Finally, the world could see just how high the stakes of sanitary plumbing were. Professional associations were formed and formal apprenticeship programs were put in place. By the mid-30s, uniform plumbing codes were legislated, and manufacturers established standards for plumbing products. Chicago, 1930. The sanitary ship canal had successfully reversed the flow of the Chicago River away from Lake Michigan and was hailed internationally as one of the 7 wonders of American engineering. But with the population continuing to grow, the city's problems were far from over.
At that time, through the canal that they had built in the North Shore Channel, the city was taking 12,000 cubic feet of water per second out of Lake Michigan to flush the system clean. But even with that large amount of water, it was still more or less a large open sewer, particularly whenever it rained. We would have a fresh influx of pollution into the river itself.
To address the problem, the Chicago Sanitary District created the largest and most advanced sewage treatment plant ever built. The facility, built on a 570-acre plot in nearby Stickney, was decidedly ahead of its time. When the EPA set strict new standards for sewage treatment more than 30 years later, the Stickney plant already exceeded them. By 1939, the Stickney plant was processing 1.2 billion gallons per day of wastewater, making it the largest facility of its kind in the world. But even that couldn't solve a problem that continued to plague the Chicago Sanitary District. Like all older cities, Chicago uses a combined sewer system for both sanitary waste and rainwater collected in storm drains. The problem? Intense rainstorms. On the average, the Windy City has 100 of them a year.
Once you get more than a little bit of rain, it was necessary to divert this mixture of sewage and rainwater away from the sewer pipe because it would flood out the sewage treatment plant. And so at various points along